the sanctions were expanded. The transactions are forbidden with Russian central bank. There are also limitations for Russian airlines. So it's not allowed for the planes to fly in the EU airspace, and to 26 legal and natural persons, there are limitations for traveling and restrictions. On the 2nd of March, several banks were disconnected from SWIFT, and also it's not allowed to cooperate with Russian Direct Investment Fund. Also, delivery of euro currency notes to any person in Russia. Also, the EU is not allowing to broadcast RT and Sputnik, considering the informative space they have created. And in addition to that, there are financial limitations and restrictions for 22 officials in Belarus. On the 9th of March, the EU imposed sanctions against the sea navigation goods and technologies, and also cryptocurrencies are included in the securities concept. So it's not allowed to deliver cryptocurrencies to Russia, and this is considered a very essential and important step how the EU has reacted towards circumvention of sanctions, showing that also modern technologies and modern financial market means cannot be used to circumvent sanctions. And also additionally, the sanctions were imposed against 160 natural persons. On the 15th of March 2022, the sanctions were imposed against the natural and legal persons. Also, it's not allowed for the technologies of extraction of oil and natural gas, the metal and imports of the metal, and also the luxury goods, the export of wide circle of luxury goods. And this is very, very important. And it is starting from 300 euros, very low monetary units, and so there will be a wide range of goods which cannot be delivered to Russia. Also, there is a ban to have any transactions with the companies owned by state, and also the credit rating services. So this is just a short outlook into the new sanctions against Russia. I just wanted to show that they are comprehensive and very, very essential, and it's important to impose them for security of our country and unity of the whole European Union. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sabine, for this explanation. We also have several questions from our listeners, and I would like to remind that it is possible to ask questions in the Slido with hashtags Sankcijas. And the question to Sabine. So, do we need to consider the sanctions of other countries, for example, from Canada, Australia, New Zealand? So is there any site where it is able to have access to the list of sanctions, and what are recommendations how to search? The whole democratic world has imposed very wide sanctions against Russia. This is a very unique case that the whole world is imposing sanctions, not only the EU, but also other countries, Japan, South Korea, and the UK and other countries. And so those sanctions have to be assessed in a specific relationship with a partner in those cooperation countries, our invitation is to check the web pages of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of those countries. And what is clear for us that those countries are also explaining a lot, and they are also publishing lists of sanctions. In addition to that, the US also have imposed very wide sanctions against Russia. And I would like to emphasize that the EU with their allies are trying to set and impose the unified sanctions so that there is an equal procedure how to impose them. Of course, in reality, it's impossible to impose identical sanctions. They, of course, are submitted to the compromise and united approach, and the sanctions set by the US. You can look them at the US, the Foreign Assets Control webpage, so you can search for them. And also in their webpage, it is just possible to see press releases, most updated, the newest sanctions this office has approved. Thank you very much, Sabine. One additional question. If there is a case of sanctioned person, is there any arbitrating or which institution takes care of this? And we speak about the EU and the US. Okay, I will try to interpret this question. So most possibly it means if you have a contract which is not possible to implement, to execute due to sanctions, I would like to draw your attention that sanctions stand over any contractual relationship. So the contract cannot be executed due to sanctions because sanctions are always over those contractual relationships. If you are in a situation with your foreign partner that there is a civil dispute, then most possibly this dispute is solved in the civil rights way, and in order to acknowledge and recognize that this decision made in the third country, our country will assess whether it's in line with our legislation, also imposing sanctions. And if it's about appealing sanctions, it is possible to do in two ways. So the appealing of the EU sanctions. So the first step is possible to write to the Council and ask to review this decision, including canceling sanctions. And the second is also you can turn to the EU court and request to cancel specific limitations or restrictions for a specific person and say that those are unjustified. Yes, thank you very much, Sabine. And one more additional question from listeners. So I would like to draw attention to all of you who are listening that we will summarize your questions and afterwards we'll provide written answers because considering your great interest, it will not be possible to answer all the questions right now, but don't worry, we have noted the questions and we'll find the ways how to answer them. And one more question to you, Sabine, and I hope you will be able to answer this question. And if not, this question will be answered afterwards. So are there any indications and also conditions how to cooperate with the company Latvijas Gāze, Latvijas Gas? Unfortunately, you cannot ask about specific cases and specific situations and any specific issue and specific case has to be analyzed and reviewed. So unfortunately, I am unable to answer this question. If you have a cooperation with Latvia's Gāze or you have questions how it is possible to organize and have this cooperation with Latvijas Gāze, then we would invite you to write to our email address, sankcijas.mfa.gov.lv, and we will try to answer to your question as soon as possible. Thank you, Sabine. Very good answer. So if we talk about specific cases, let us try to gather information by ourselves. And in case if you need some kind of specific consultation still, then let us use the support of institutions. Thank you, Sabine, for your presentation and also providing answers to questions. And thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the work you've been doing in order to impose sanctions. And from topicalities in sanctions, from this general explanation and conditions that has to be taken into account imposing them. As you saw, the amount and the scope of sanctions is huge, and also the sectors. And one of the most critical are the sanctions in the financial sector. And as representatives of the Finance Latvia Association and representing this association, I can say that there is a lot of work, and we have imposed already a lot of sanctions, and as they are added every day and changed, we have to review this list. And also, thank you very much to the Financial and Capital Market Commission that is providing support for the financial sector, and in cooperation with the state institutions, they are looking for the best solutions for specific cases. So therefore, as the next speaker, I would like to introduce Kristaps Markovskis, who is representative of Financial and Capital Market Commission, and he is Money Laundering and Sanction Department Director, and he will speak about the imposing of international sanctions in financial sector.
Thank you, Laima. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me and hear me. As the colleagues said several times, these are very broad sanctions, and this is a challenge for us as the supervisors of the market. And we are working in order to answer and clarify some questions you might have. And we are concentrating on the questions we have received from you in order to provide support in implementation of the sanctions. Very briefly, I would like to begin with a slide in order to show the Finance Capital Market Commission role and also introduce you to the world of the sanctions in finance sector. And there are 3 stages in sanction implementation. First of all, it is imposition of sanctions, and there the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Finance Capital Market Commission also has a role. Then they evaluate the sanctions. Then the next stage comes, which is implementation of the sanctions, where we are all responsible for compliance with the regulation. And then there is a supervision block, which is a responsibility also of Finance Capital Market Commission, which is provision of support for these sanctions to be also efficiently and correspondingly implemented in practice. We're talking about some exclusions from those rules and maybe some permissions, and permissions also given by Finance Capital Market Commission, and what are the requirements for receiving such. As Sabine also told about the sanctions which we all need to implement, I would like to divide them into 2 larger blocks. One is restrictions directed towards particular companies and people. And then there is the next block. It is the restrictions on the products, services. And each day we see that the amount of sanctions increase. Thus, it is important for us to follow regularly the developments and how the sanctions are added. And if we're talking about the sectoral sanctions, it is imports. As an example, just a couple of days ago, we saw that it was prohibited to import metal from Russia. And here I want to address the businessmen, entrepreneurs. You not only have to look at the direct supplier, but also with whom they work indirectly, because what is the origin of the raw material itself? Because we saw it during times of Belarusian sanctions, when they had restrictions on oil supply. There were attempts to import them using other jurisdictions in order to conceal the origin of the product. So I would like to say to those entrepreneurs working with such products is that they need to pay attention to the origin of the raw material. The next part is export restrictions. Those are very broad restrictions on various products and services. As an example, I can mention the oil industry, aviation industry, also luxury goods and products. And the third part is access to capital and assets, where we are not allowed to credit to Russian companies and in any way provide them access to capital. The second block we were talking about regarding the sanctions imposed on particular persons, we're talking about a property and control through property right. Then also indirectly, we are monitoring the chains of legal entities. In the next slide, I will show you how this supervision can be ensured indirectly and what to pay attention to. I will also give total numbers in finance sector banks. As at end of the day, 11th of March, they have already frozen 11.5 million euros. And I can confirm this amount is going to be higher. We have received new information from banks, and we see that the banks are working very actively. They are also monitoring the situation. And in total, we have two natural persons and 26 legal entities whose assets are frozen. We're talking about, I want to pay attention to legal entities. They are not directly in the sanction list, but they are being supervised through the sanctioned persons, showing how important it is for us to pay attention to concentrate on not only screening, but also in-depth see this situation in the legal structure, in the management structure of the company. If we're talking about asset freezing and cooperation, it is not important for us to prove that the assets are illegal and that money laundering is ongoing. It is not that important. In this case, it is enough if we only show that this is a sanctioned person or how the sanctioned person is controlling the chain. For example, indirectly. Also, I would like to talk about the steps which the companies, which businesses need to do in order to ensure that their business partners are not sanctioned. But before I go into some legal details, I would like to quote Mr. Karinch. Yesterday, he said that economic cooperation with Russia is not possible, and the company is preparing support measures. And also, he said that we should be looking further beyond the sanctions from the news we receive and what we see as the situation develops in long term, because currently, as the Russia is realizing their management, we have to be thinking about how we get out of this cooperation with Russian companies, not by finding some legal constructions, legal structures, how we can make, how we can still continue cooperation. This is important to take into consideration, not make exceptions and try to find them, but how we work in long term with sanctions. And going through this structure, how the company, how the entrepreneur can make sure that they are not working with a sanctioned person. The first is sanction lists, where you find, where you search for the company or the structure of managers and owners of this company. We check whether they are not in sanction list. And then we get to one of the 5 conclusions possible, which gives us an opportunity, a possibility to make further decisions. The first 2 frames to the left, there we see that, for example, it is straightforward. For example, the owner, or in this case, is sanctioned or is controlled by the sanctioned person, then it is straightforward. So clear that we are seizing the cooperation. But if currently there is no restrictions to cooperation with Russia as such, but again, stressing this further into the future vision that we can have even more sanctions and restrictions imposed, and we have to be thinking not only from the sanction list view, but also we have to look beyond that. The next 2 squares are showing us an example, a situation that, for example, you see the structure of owners, but you cannot conclude who is controlling the particular company. And you do indeed also need to make a decision to suspend cooperation with them, because it is not clear who is the manager or owner of the company. Very often we see such difficult structures when they are concealing the beneficiaries or shareholders. And then there will be situations when there is a possibility that the partners indirectly are controlled by a sanctioned person. And then you have to make this risk decision. In today's circumstances, if there is a possibility, if there is a slightest possibility, then I think that it is better to seize the cooperation. For example, but we also can, in short term, continue cooperation, but impose our own restrictions regarding the risks we cannot actively manage. I will go through some of the examples how the control, direct control or indirect control, can be implemented. In this case, we see that the control is realized through another legal entity. So if your cooperation partner is the company Celtnis, then you have to understand who are the owners of that company, are those legal entities, and then you get to natural persons. If we're talking about company Rublis, then company Ruble is sanctioned and you don't have to go to the structure of the owners. But in this case, if you have only the legal entity, you need to know who controls this company if it is not directly included in the sanction list. Another example, which is more sophisticated, is when the control is being realized through a person who is in the position, a particular position in a particular company, whereby they can implement control or realize the control over the company. The example shows why we need to review the company structure and legal model, how they work. Another example is the cover-up companies. It is from practice, and it's a more difficult example is when also what banks have been able to identify in their measures. Here we see that the control is being realized not through ownership rights or structures, but with an agreement, whereby there is an agreement between EEE and Ruble that whether EEE is as an agent or a particular representative representing sanctioned persons or sanctioned legal entities' ruble interests. With these examples, I wanted to show how the ownership rights structures are used and what are the control elements in order to conceal, in order to hide the sanctioned persons, because of course all those people know they are sanctions and they are thinking about the ways how to go around sanctions and circumvent them. We're also going to be talking about typologies, what we see, what finance sector sees, what are being used in order to circumvent the sanctions. I want to draw your attention that if it is your responsibility to know and monitor the sanctions and also monitor or make sure that there's no circumvention of the sanctions, then yes, you're also liable according to the law. Now we're going to the next block. It is the permit issue. There are various rules when you can relieve the assets, and to the left we see, for example, some of the examples. It is, for example, salary, taxes, sanctioned persons and their family members' basic needs in order to ensure the successful processing of payments. As I said, we have 26 companies. Behind that, there are employees and taxpayers. And in order to ensure the processing of these payments, we have also in the Commission decided on the general permit, which allows the banks, after application of the client, when it is justified that these are basic needs, to provide these payments, processing of these payments, so that we do not have to spend time on individual permits, for example, for each salary transaction, for example. And here are both natural persons and legal entities, and the information is available on the webpage of the Commission, where you can familiarize yourself with the terms. And to the right, we see how these permits are being issued, and this is a standard situation when there's no general permit and thereby it does not fall into the category of the general permit. Then they have to submit an application to the bank where they justify that this is a basic needs which is being asked to be insured, and the bank then from its part again performs the initial review, the due diligence, and then they go to FCMC and ask for permission. And then again, we are assessing this permit. We make sure that we see that these indeed are the basic needs, and we have no doubt that this is not being done in order to circumvent the sanctions, and we can then allow such measures to be taken. And also on the level of EU, through MFA, we inform other states and EU organizations that we have had such permits, so that they do not ask the same exemptions in other countries too. We're going to the next unit is regarding the liabilities previously already concluded upon, and how to still realize the previously agreed upon contracts, and how far they should be realized. Before I go to some practical examples, some real-world examples, I want to talk about the principles, how we interpret these liabilities. We are talking about previously concluded agreements, that this is before the sanctions were imposed, and here I want to again draw your attention to the terms, when exactly were the agreements concluded, because we have to make sure that they are not actually they are not trying to conclude some agreements retrospectively in order to circumvent the sanctions against a person. And the second condition, it also comes from the explanations of the European Commission, is that we need to interpret it as narrow as possible, because we need to ensure as quickly as possible any agreement termination with sanctioned persons. I want to stress once again that each case has to be evaluated individually by evaluating individual terms and conditions, and we need to look at when it was concluded, the agreement, and these and we need to make sure that indeed these liabilities were existing before sanction imposition. In this case, Latvian company, a client, and the company needs to pay for the product supplied. It is a rather simple example. The company needs to show the documents that the product is supplied, received prior to sanction imposition, and the next condition is that the payment for this product is also made to the Latvian bank, to the bank operating in Latvia. So we need to be able to make sure that this money, these assets, are going to be frozen immediately, so that they are not available to the entity cooperating, which is sanctioned. And as I said also in the previous slide, then we need to submit an application to the bank and FCMC to receive a permit. If there is a long-term agreement with a sanctioned person, whereby individual orders are being realized, well, can we continue? Of course not. Such agreements cannot continue operating because, again, as is the previous example, and with this master agreement example, you simply terminate it. We have to take note that this does not only, it's not only like that regarding the products, but also the services. Let us go to the third example, which is the most difficult, but in our practice we have seen such too, and I want to individually stress this disclaimer about individual evaluation of circumstances. If the product is ordered but not yet delivered, what are the actions to be taken? We have to think through the view of how we terminate the liability and not how we continue it as long as possible. We see here that there are three conditions which we need to take into consideration. And this is first, that cancellation of the agreement is not possible. Second one, freezing of the assets is possible, or sanctioned persons' circumstances are not being improved by this deal. And so these are the 3 points also which can show that commitment compliance is not possible, that the product is produced to the client individually and it cannot be substituted, that the product is believed to be already under the ownership of the client. For example, when you have to yet cut something or produce something and it has to be returned to the client. And also, we have to evaluate the situation with losses. So by assessing the legal person, we can see that the losses has to be undertaken by the client, and thus the sanctioned person actually remains with more because they are left with the product they do not deliver, and then they are also, their losses are covered. Then also similarly to as in the first situation, we need an application in the bank with justification, with explanation, whereby the FCMC permission follows. And this is my last slide as a summary regarding the liability, responsibility from the finance sector. We see administrative liability, criminal liability, reputational risk, and correspondent relationship risk. Because we have administrative liability, it is possible as a penalty or a restriction of the rights, and also criminal liability is provided for by Article 84 of criminal law for involvement in circumvention of sanctions, and also, of course, risks on reputation. In any way, if we do get involved in not complying with the sanctions or circumventing them. Thank you for your attention. I hope that I was able to answer at least part of your questions, because I understand there are many questions, and in the FCMC homepage we have questions and answers section, and also to help you. Thank you, Kristaps, for the presentation. I want to say that you have answered the questions to many questions that we have in our seminar. But I will ask about the permission, the permit from the Commission. Just to be clear, if you address the Commission with asking, is it the bank of sanctioned person, or it can also be by the creditor? Can the creditor also address the Commission? In this case, I think that it can be also the creditor, because the situation can be the other way around. It means that the money belongs to the company in Latvia because sanctioned person has a relation. And in such case, we also see that such permit needs to be issued, because in our interest, it is for the sanctioned person to fulfill their obligations and commitments, not to relieve them from these commitments, and they are left with assets on their side. These cases are exceptions when the permission will be granted. And also one more question, knowing that we have had previously such questions from credit institutions in the context of other sanction imposition, this question has been discussed very much. It's been topical, but what about the beneficiaries after sanction imposition? For example, previously the beneficiary and the owners were different, and now they're changing the structure. Yes, such situations we are evaluating, we are admitting as circumvention of the sanctions, because it is not allowed to change the status of beneficiaries according to the sanctions. So we are freezing any possible also assets of these persons, also their ownership rights on the companies, and their rights to transfer their ownership rights of the company. Thus, we see that such transactions are not allowed, because then we have like really big backdoor how you can circumvent the sanctions, where we will not see any more sanctioned persons in the structures of the company, because formally it is not a problem to register other persons as beneficiaries, and to see that in the background actually the real owners and those who control the company are persons from the sanction list. I want to also remind that the recording of this seminar is going to be will be available to you in the homepages of the organizations involved. And let us continue. It is no secret that a large part of the sanctions are imposed on the possibilities of transactions between the companies, between the natural persons. So the next speaker, Igor Petrov, Blue Orange Bank Management Board member and International Financial Section Work Group manager.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me too. So can I have my presentation on screen? So we had a very good presentation so far, and also a summary about sanctions and technical details, and we received really very valuable advice how to assess the partners. And I will try to speak about practical aspects. We will speak about transactions and settlements with Russian companies. So about the topics I'm going to cover. At first, I will speak about jurisdictions of sanctions we need to think about. We also had questions related to that, and I must say that we as citizens and companies registered in the EU, for us, the EU tax sanctions, imposed sanctions are binding. And also for banks that work in Latvia, also FAC sanctions EUS are binding. And so my recommendation is for entrepreneurs also to take this into account. So irrespectively where the accounts are located. And also, I would like you to draw attention to the sanctions from the UK, which is not directly binding, but they are very often ahead of other jurisdictions, and they impose sanctions which are later imposed also by the US and the EU. And we can also not forget about counter sanctions, response from the Russian Federation, which often means that several operations cannot be executed, not due to the EU or US sanctions, but Russian sanctions. For example, to transfer accounts from the account in Russia to accounts in the EU, it will not be allowed by the Russian bank. I will speak also about restrictions of export-import and sanctioned persons and the controlled companies, banks, which are sanctioned, technical difficulties with transactions and relationship with banks, and a little bit I will speak also about investments. About restrictions and limitations for export and imports, I will say honestly, 2 days ago, I had a totally different presentation in my head, but considering the most recent sanctions, which were published in the EU side, it is even quite difficult to tell about all the restrictions because they are expanded and they get wider and wider. And before the war in Ukraine ends, this is just one direction that the scope is expanded. And maybe also colleagues who already spoke about export restrictions. So there is import-export restrictions related to technologies, military or dual-use goods, and also the last developments is luxury goods, which is a very wide scope of goods that is basis. So how you can determine whether this is luxury goods or not? The threshold is 300 euros. So this is a very wide scope, tennis balls and so on and so forth. And for technologies, this is 750 is the threshold. So a lot of goods are banned. And so therefore I would recommend to check the SRS, State Revenue Service web page, whether this type of goods are banned, and if yes, in line which legislative act and what specifically is banned. Also, I would like to speak about sectoral sanctions, which do not forbid cooperation with a specific partner, but forbids to finance them. So it means that also advance payments can be also considered as financing. And that was important already since 2014. And considering how wide are the restrictions, now it is not binding for a very wide circle of goods. What is also important, what Kristaps already spoke in his presentation about sanctioned persons and also companies they control and properties they control. I will not tell the same, but it is very important to understand what kind of person is our partner, whether they are sanctioned or maybe the company is sanctioned at the other end. And also if we speak about intermediaries, so check those intermediaries and also end receivers. And because all this chain of delivery counts and is important. And so I will not spend too much time here. But talking about banks under sanctions, so sanctioned banks, there are 3 banks which have blocking sanctions, so Bank Russia, Promios Bank, and Web RF. So what does it mean? Not only transactions and deals and cooperations with these banks are not forbidden, but also any cooperation with clients of those banks. And so that limits possibilities to receive services. And Alpha Bank, also I would like to mention, it is not directly sanctioned, but this is under the control of sanctioned person. So also payments with clients of Alpha Bank are banned now. So it means you cannot send money to the accounts of those clients because bank will deny this transaction, and you will not also be able to receive those finances. And also you can see the list with banks in Russia and Belarus, where SWIFT is disconnected, and so also it's not possible to cooperate with them and their clients. And there are also OFAC sanctions, which are partially covering the same. And not maybe my topic, but I just wanted to speak about technical difficulties with transactions and settlements. So generally, we can speak about 3 types. First is SCPA payments, Target 2, and the corresponding accounts. SCPA payments are euros in the EU and the Eurozone. And if a company is registered in Russia and Belarus, and the account is in euros and also registered in bank in the EU, then it's possible to have settlements, possibly. I cannot say definitely. And also about targets 2, quite a significant part of payments go through target 2 and corresponding accounts. This is traditional historic system, how this is organized for banks and bank clients. It means one bank opens the account and in another bank, and settlements with other banks and other clients are through those accounts. And what happens now, if we speak about Russian side, there are restrictions about sending money out of Russia. This is one. And second is that Latvian banks and also Russian banks and banks of other countries, for example, Austria, Sweden, are very careful looking at corresponding relationship with Russia. And my personal opinion is that we can expect certain difficulties and also restrictions to have settlements with Russian companies which are not sanctioned. This is, of course, a different story if they are sanctioned. But it is quite hard to have these settlements in other currencies except for euros. But of course, it is different for each bank or each of banks, because each bank has other network of corresponding banks. And so if you don't have euros, you need to have settlements in other currencies. You have to ask your bank whether they technically can provide and ensure of these transactions. As to relationship with banks, as we spoke, it is the first step is you have to discover and find out who is the recipient and controlling persons and the shareholders of the deal you are having, and so that they are not sanctioned, the ones you are not allowed to cooperate. If there are intermediaries, shareholders, and if you are doing something through the intermediaries, you have to understand who is the recipient of goods and also who is the sender of goods. As to the steel and the country of origin, for example, company in Estonia and company in Hungary, but the origin of the goods and the steel is Russian, then this is also a violation. So you have to explore all the chain. And what are banks expecting from the client? So maximum details, as much as possible information, also the codes of goods. Then we'll look at those codes and we will check whether this is allowed or banned. According to the latest developments in sanctions, I would say that the price for 1 unit of goods to export it to Russia is very important to understand whether this can be classified as luxury goods or no. And before you make the transactions, you also submit the documents to the bank so that we from our side can also assess whether there are risks of violating sanctions or not. And if you have received the permission from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or other competent institution to allow you to do the export, then also it is very important to send those documents to the bank as well. For the transport companies, it is very important to know that that the load was, and there should be these codes of specific goods, and also there has to be information about the sender and shareholders and all the owners and so on. And then also the bank details have to be known of the person, of the recipient. If it's, for example, Alpha Bank, then your bank will not send the transaction to that bank. And also you have to discover what are those technical possibilities for your specific bank to perform those transactions. I also wanted to emphasize that this cooperation with Russia is very complicated, also with Belarus. All of us, we understand that the reasons for the sanctions, and we understand that those regions are under very high risk. And so my recommendation would be to think in this crisis not only about risks at the first hand, but about opportunities at the first hand, but to think about risks and also about risks of circumventing sanctions. For example, if a partner in Russia offers you to receive payments from the company of the third country, think about it and explore whether this is not a circumvention of sanctions and or attempt to do this. And also talking a little bit about a different topic about investments. We understand that some of you are investing, some are investing in Russian market, and just want to cover this question a little bit. So what is important? The shares of the banks that are under sanctions, it's not possible to sell or to buy. This is essential. And also it's complicated and more difficult to sell and work with securities, and also the stock market of Russia right now is closed. And also if we talk about the US and third countries emittents which have Russian capital, the trade is still happening, but the risks are very high. And if sanctions, scope of sanctions is expanded, it won't be possible to purchase those shares. Also, the companies and stock exchange of the UK and other large countries have stopped trading shares of several Russian companies, and also from the Russian side, it is not allowed to sell the Russian securities to non-residents, and so therefore Russian market is also very toxic, and I wouldn't recommend to try to earn money from the Russian exchanges or to play with the shares or obligations or securities. So thank you very much. That's all from my side, and I will be happy to answer questions if there are any.
Laima, es tevi nedzirdu.
Laima, we cannot hear you.
Pateicos par iespēju uzgaidīt tehniski labojumi.
Thank you for waiting. We had some technical improvements. Besides those complicated issues related to sanctions, there are a lot of questions, and as banks are facing them, I will ask them, and I hope you will be able to answer. So very practical questions. If the company is a joint stock company, 50% belong to the Russia, one official is in the list of sanctioned persons. So how would bank look at this company, and what should entrepreneur do, and how to assess the risks, stop cooperation, or what to do? I would like to say that in general, those are the cases each bank will analyze separately. The structure of shareholders is important to understand whether there are ownership rights. 51% is the threshold if the owner is a sanctioned person or is the company of Russia according to latest developments. And if the sanctioned person is an official, then at the moment I would say that we would be very careful whether not to qualify this company as a company under control of a sanctioned person. So my answer would be I wouldn't cooperate with such a client. Thank you very much, Igor. And you also spoke about several companies that impose sanctions. Can you explain about sanctions of the UK? Are they binding for Latvia? This is in context with the NATO companies. So we know that the US OFAC sanctions are binding for us, but what about Great Britain? If we talk about the US, everything is clear. The UK, I would say that this is a very significant partner for Latvia, and therefore I would look very carefully at their sanctions. Better, maybe legally they are not so clearly and directly binding, but practically I would say that we also look at and check the sanctions of the UK. And also a very important question in context about the amount of deposits for the citizens of Russia and Belarus. So what is communication of banks about not exceeding these amounts of deposits of them, how to act and where to search for more information about that? In general, this is a new type of sanctions, I would say, new restrictions which we didn't have before. So what happens now is that the banking sector, together with the regulator, we have agreed that the money before 27th of February is legal. It was received before restrictions, but if the new money comes, we are checking whether the remaining money wouldn't exceed 100,000. So this is the main information. So for all the incoming payments, we look what kind of the balance is left. And what is also important and essential, that whether the citizen of Russia and Belarus have the residence permit. If they have the residence permit in our countries, then this threshold is not binding for them. And also the transactions of securities of a person who have only citizenship of Russia and Belarus, they are under special attention not to exceed this threshold of 100,000. Thank you. Considering this question, there are great interest about possibilities of natural persons of Russia and Belarus to purchase real estate. So from the bank point of view, what is done and what restrictions have to be done? The restriction is the same as before, 100,000. And if we talk about the lower amount of money, I don't see any problems if the person is not sanctioned themselves. If we talk about larger amount of money, then we are looking at restrictions. The person this balance in one bank cannot be higher than 100,000. Thank you very much. Also, the question related to the transactions done before. So if the raw materials were delivered already before the sanctions imposed, and now the money has to be paid. So what does bank expect from the client? The bank expects the client to submit to the bank all just justifying documents, also documents about delivery of goods, and then we will look at the date, at a moment of delivery, sanctions, and make a decision in a very each specific case separately whether to impose sanctions on this transaction or not. If we consider that there is a risk of violating sanctions, we have a regulator, supervisor who can grant or not grant permission to do this transaction. And of course, if bank sees that this payment can be related to the violation of sanctions, the bank would deny this deal. Thank you very much. And the final question. There is a large interest. A bank has a lot of questions about due diligence and whether there's sanctions imposed. So what is experience with discovering which are the real beneficial owners on the Russian-Belarusian side? Our experience to determine the real beneficial owners is very good. For Latvian banks, there are registers about Russia, the free of charge, and also for a fee, where it is possible to discover the real beneficial owners. And if a specific company is not in the registers, we ask the partners to submit their legal documents which justify the ownership rights. And if it's not possible, then banks take the conservative position. If it's not possible to discover, we most possibly deny the payment. Thank you very much, Igor. So with this advice to entrepreneurs, we will also continue our seminar. So let us be cautious, let us assess all the risks and whether taking those risks is adequate, and whether behind impossibility to discover and to establish something isn't the attempts to circumvent sanction. And now we continue our presentation with FIU presentation, and the deputy head of the strategic analysis of FIU, Pauls Inļenkovs, will speak about the role of FIU in the sanction issues.
Hello, Laima. Hello, viewers. Thank you for invitation. And today I'm going to talk about the FIU role. And I do represent FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit, and I am deputy head of the department. And I will be talking about the sanction searchers. And this has become very popular homepage lately. I will also be talking about the freezing of the assets, what freezing really means in the regulation, and how does it differ also from when FIU freezes probably assets involved in money laundering. Even though the consequences initially are the same, but then they differ in the context what happens or what can be done next with these assets. And the third topic is circumvention of sanctions in the fulfillment of financial restrictions. So FIU sanction search information about the subjects, and this is being published in fid.gov.lv. You have seen probably this homepage. There's a so sanction screening or sanction search, it is something that is crucially important in order to implement the sanctions and impose them. However, we also need to remember that these persons themselves also know that they're in sanction lists, and they will try to find ways how to hide behind some shell companies, offshore companies, different structures, family members, nominated directors, and other companies, so that they can avoid the sanctions. So the screening is only part, so it is the first step in order to ensure the sanction operation. We are able to review our partners, our business partners, whether they are not under the ownership of sanctioned persons and companies. Also about FIU sanction search is there we can find sanctioned persons where they have directly been sanctioned, physical and legal entities or other subjects which can be identified, and they can be found in UN or EU documents. And this is why we cannot reflect sectoral sanctions on products and services, for example, in our sanction search, because in EU and UN documents, for example, we do not see physical and legal entities who operate in the sectoral sanction fields. So also related companies and their family members then cannot be included in this list because ownership rights can be changed. And in the source documents which come from UN or EU, they are not included in such lists. So FIU reflects information as it comes from the issuing organization of the sanctions. Also, I need to note that US, UK sanctions, direct and single-sided sanctions, are not reflected there because we don't have such mandate in order to ensure publication in our systems. And this is why in FIU sanction search, you will not find Latvian persons who are included in US sanctions. Let us go to the next slide. The sanction search is where we find the subjects as they are, also formalization and transliteration with Latin in Latin alphabet. So if you try to find it in Latvian, for example, Vladimirs Putins, the search criteria is not found. But if we are looking for Vladimir without that word ending S, then we will find. Another little nuance that if the sanction decision is made, for example, yesterday or just now, we need to also say that the EU, in case of EU sanctions, sometimes there's a lagging behind in order for them to be included first in the XML format, which is necessary for them to be included in the search. It is updated every hour, integrating all the data coming from the EU, but if EU has yet not included in the XML format, we will not see it. So with packages of sanctions, there has been this lag, and with the several hour lag, they were published. So we also recommend reviewing the official journals. Well, this is just a nuance. It can be also so that the sanction list is updated very quickly, the XML format. This is regarding the FIU sanction search. I have to note OFAC sanctions and UK sanctions we have available in our search, but of course, you will not find OFAC and UK sanctioned persons in our search. We have access to those sanction lists, but they are not included in our search. You will not find them there. As I said, we don't have a mandate. We have a anti-money laundering law on money laundering and terrorism financing, and this is restriction to transfer, use, access, or any activity with assets where the amount, location, owner, user, characteristics, and aims of use can change of the assets. Also asset management. So this is the extract from the law on money laundering. And if we're talking about the sanctions, then we need to understand that physical and legal entities against whom the sanctions are imposed, all those people, all their ownership rights, all their assets need to be frozen, all their property. It comes from EU regulations and also Part 1, Section 5 of sanction law, which means that if there are financial restrictions, then all persons in accordance with their competence, they have an obligation immediately and without prior notice to perform such activities, which is to freeze all financial assets and financial instruments. And these activities are performed by the credit institutions, financial institutions, at their own discretion, without prior warning. Based on the regulations of the EU, they freeze all the assets belonging to particular persons. The credit institutions, banks, they do not report to FIU because this is finalization of the process. This is a direct activity. They report their supervisory institution, which is the FCMC. And then the consequences are clear. This is not temporary. This is for indefinite time until these entities or persons are excluded from those lists. It doesn't work in any other way. Just like that, directly until they are excluded from the list or indefinitely. Oftentimes, the freezing is being mistaken with what FIU even does. And as we know, the FIU has the right to issue freezing orders. But it is then when the FIU believes that it might be that the assets are laundered or there's an attempt to finance terrorism, or it is involved in terrorism funding. And always there will be material sent to investigation bodies. There will be criminal case initiated most probably, and most probably they are going to be frozen and given back to the rightful owner or seized and confiscated in the benefit of the country. In case of sanctions, with freezing, it all ends. Whereas if in cases when we believe that they might be laundered, this money is illicit proceeds, then it is different according to terms and according to further activities. This is one of the nuances we need to take into consideration until before we get to the last point, which is the role of FIU in sanction issues. It is the restrictions on financial transactions. So the sanctioned persons know that they are sanctioned, and they will attempt to circumvent the sanctions, will try to continue cooperating with sectors that are also under sanctions, or they would like to receive some economic benefits, financial benefits. According to sanction law, Article 13, Part 4, Index 1, it means that circumvention, attempt or circumvention in the law, the financial intelligence unit is the competent institution in such cases in international national sanction circumvention. And here there is a question. Circumvention and breach of sanctions, well, legally, there is no difference. Nobody defines what is circumvention or sanction breach, although we all understand what we're talking about. It is the economic resource transferred to sanctioned people, persons, or entities. In case anyone attempts to breach the sanctions in some sophisticated way by using some prolonged supply chains, offshore companies, hidden beneficiaries and beneficiary owners, fictitious agreements, that you need to report to financial intelligence unit, and they are assessing whether money laundering and circumvention takes place, and they will admit them to be laundered assets, and then within the competence of FIU they can later seize, confiscate the assets. Also, criminal liability is provided for by that, because this is a violation, and if as a result the assets gained they are then later hidden, then 195 article of the criminal law, which is money laundering of illicit proceeds. So we need to make sure whether knowingly or unknowingly they were or were not involved in money laundering activities. At the end, I wanted to show two case analysis how circumvention might look like. In FIU, we have had such activities when we have found them, and we have issued orders on freezing of the assets, and we have sent the information to investigation bodies, to law enforcement. In Latvia, CIA or A Limited, registered in Latvia, and then company B, registered in Belarus. Latvian company delivers the goods to the company B. Product delivery is transfer of economic resource. Company B, beneficial owner, is against the owner of this company, the sanctions are imposed. After imposition of sanctions, the company B signs agreement with the third country, company C, regarding their credit liability transfer. This company is not sanctioned. And then the company C performs the payment to company A on the delivery of goods to the company, which is under sanctions, company B, which occurs after the sanction imposition. Thus, it means that company A has transferred economic benefit or funding to company B, and thus improved their economic situation, and and we made the decision to freeze assets of company A received by company C, because this is artificially prolonging of the cooperation chains, and they breached the sanction restrictions. So the funding on the account, the assets on the account of A received by the company C, it was frozen and then transferred. The information was transferred to the investigators, to the prosecution, and they sent the case to the court and initiated the criminal proceedings. And now they're reviewing the question about confiscation and holding criminally liable the involved. Case number 2. In Latvia registered CIA received the money from company B in Russia for already delivered goods. The agreement is concluded between A and C, the company C in Russia, and then in the amount of 80%, this company belongs to another company, company D from Russia, who is a sanction subject. If you own 80% of company C, then it means that this is also a sanctioned company, and these business relationships, then are well considered to be high risk. Then company C concludes agreement with company B, whereby C commitment is undertaken by company B and they can pay for it. So the agreement was signed after D was included in the sanction list. So indications about the transfer of the commitment is, again, the suspicion is there are grounds to believe so that it has been done in order to circumvent the sanctions. And thus, it is the subsidiary company C, and company B is used as an intermediary for the company C to be able to pay for their transactions. Again, this is unnecessary entity which is being involved, company B, and company C works as a subsidiary of company D, and this is the criminal laws article 84 and also regulations of EU. Company A received payment from company B, which is a result of circumvention of the sanctions, and we can decide on freezing the assets of CIA in Latvia, and within the criminal proceedings we can arrest, prosecute, and convict and freeze the assets. This means that we see the example of circumvention of sanctions, and we need to be very careful and check our partners so that they fictitiously do not change company structures or cooperation with companies in order to avoid the sanctions. And if there is suspicion on circumvention and breach, then such relationship shall no longer be ongoing. It has to be terminated, otherwise there is a liability provided for by the criminal law. Thank you for your attention. My time is up. Thank you for presentation from FIU. Thank you, Paulis. And we have questions. I will start with one rather easy, and I know you can answer. For example, if the company doesn't know, but they have breached, they have circumvented the sanctions, and they have cooperated with the sanctioned company, what are the consequences? Well, again, from the point of view of criminal law, whether there are any sanctions, we need to be talking with the representatives of the prosecutor's office. But in such case, anyways, according to the sanction law, you have to report the State Security Service about the situation you have found or found yourself to be. So again, this intention or unintentionality, we need to see whether or not the breach has occurred. Well, it seems like everything has to be okay, but anyways, you need to report. So the recommendation then is to research this topic and not just go with the flow and think that, well, you're probably not going to get in trouble. Yes, this is what also companies mentioned, and today, this is from FIU, we need to say once more, remind this is an unprecedented situation. Latvia is especially exposed because 2 of 4 our neighboring countries are under sanctions. So, well, statistically, how many entities do have partners in these companies? And this is very important to defend ourselves, to make ourselves more secure. Sanctions is just one first step, and this research is the first step in order to make sure that we are not involved in sanction breach. FIU sanction search is first step, but I will ask you this uncomfortable question, both from physical persons and entities, companies. Is there one search engine available where you can find all the information, or as you also said, that you have to use several resources? Although I think I know what is the answer. If you work in a bank, if you work in a company with big exposure, definitely you are already aware of where to find the information. And of course, makes sense to develop some paid service even to accumulate all the information. But definitely, yes, currently there is no such engine and tool. The business model might change, diversification. They're trying to circumvent the sanctions. For example, they work in the field of sanction field, but then again, so it's not correct to also generalize too much if they also work in the field which is not sanctioned, but the person, well, maybe not violating anything. So sanction search is step 1. Further is the research of the client, due diligence, and understanding of those fields. So sanction search, in most cases even, will not be the big answer to everything. Thank you. And in the analysis of these practical cases, for example, what it would have changed if, for example, FCMC gives the permit about the particular cases, I will not comment if the permit were given, because I'm not allowed to also disclose any details regarding these practical cases. Well, I have also changed them, altered them for them not to look so similar to how they really were. This is confidential information, but if you believe that exception can be applicable to your situation, that you have to go to the competent institution and ask for, but not create the artificial chain of transactions and to think that nobody is going to notice. Definitely go and ask for permit in the competent institution, because in one case you will receive the answer no, but thank you, Paulis, for your presentation, and I wish you good luck in your work and also the part of work you do regarding the sanctions. Now let us take a little break, and we will continue with a very broad program. We'll meet Ministry of Finance representatives and other colleagues, and State Revenue Service and tax and customs nuances, and to our conversation also experts from Citadel Bank are going to they're going to join us, and we're going to be talking about some conditions. KPMG will provide us with supply chain analysis, and the Lursoft consultant about management solutions. At the end of the seminar, we will listen to Ministry of Justice on physical person asset freezing and related processes in the country. Let us meet in 15 minutes.
Sveicu atpakaļ seminārā uzņēmējiem.
Welcome back to the seminar for entrepreneurs about international sanctions against Russia and Belarus. And it is important for entrepreneurs to understand what has to be taken into account doing transactions with Russia and Belarus and all the lists of sanctioned persons and so on. Thank you very much for your attention in the first part of the workshop, receiving a lot of questions. We see there is a lot of viewers and they are getting more and more. I would like also to note that the recording of the seminar and also presentations will be available on the web pages of organizers, and the questions asked will be answered, and we will try to get answers from the institutions and publish together with the materials of the seminar. As the next speaker, I would like to introduce representatives of the Ministry of Finance, the director of the Direct Taxes Department, Asta Kaļāne, and also the deputy head of the Direct Tax Department, Andrejs Birums. They will speak about tax aspects and sanctions and answer the questions asked before. Good day. Thank you very much to the organizers of the seminar that they have raised such a topical and important issue, and that they are discussing it in a very detailed way with experts and representatives from the sector. Although the previous speakers had presentations, the tax aspect is not very directly related to the international sanctions, but the tax aspect, of course, is derived from the consequences the company might have if their cooperation partners are under those sanctions, or they cannot receive some payments from the partners. So therefore, we would like to think what happens to the company if they have a cooperation partner who is sanctioned, and as a result, the company might have problems that it is very hard for them to get back their finances which were paid for purchasing some goods or some other payments. And if there are some kind of difficulties, we have to look at the corporate tax. And what does the corporate tax say? The companies in this case have to look not only at the existing version of the law, but also right now in our parliament in the second reading is a draft law about changes, amendments in the corporate tax, where there are good things in relation to the debtors' debts. So how those increase or decrease the income which is subject to the corporate tax. I believe that this law will be approved in the third reading, not later than after 3 weeks, 2 weeks. I see that it's not on the agenda today, but we saw that the parliament members were very supportive for those amendments. And so what happens? So with those debts, and we have to think not only about our direct cooperation partners, but also that our cooperation partners, a large part of their finances are involved in some other transaction, and so indirectly this cooperation partner is involved in the chain of these sanctioned companies, and so there is a chain reaction. So what does the corporate tax say? The corporate tax doesn't make us to look at these loans of sanctioned companies to straight away include in the income which is subject to tax. Of course, the policy is that those debts have to be included as costs, and if company consider that they would not get it back, this is a policy of the company. But there is also a separate models that when the savings are made, and talking to these sanctioned companies and also supply chains, it would be very suitable to make savings for some time. And so making savings, how does it relate to this corporate tax? It relates that 36 months are related to the fact that those savings can be for 36 months, which are not subject to tax. And in case if they those debts are not included in the costs. And this is a usual regulation which is according to our law. Also in the draft law, which is now in our parliament, the deadline has been expanded from 36 months to 60 months. And when our cooperation partner has started insolvency procedure. So this time frame could even be increased. And also very important for the companies that use the international review standard, standard number 9. It means that the company, the debts of their debtors can classify in a certain way. So not each individually, but they are grouped. And in this case, in the corporate tax, in these amendments I spoke about, there is a possibility for such a model that the company ensures the implementation of standard number 9, and also there is a special accountancy policy in relation to debts, and the company can follow each specific debt, and the module is created that this corporate tax is not increased, and this debt do not increase the corporate tax 60 months after it was created. So if we talk about sanctions against Russia and Belarus from the point of view of corporate tax, we believe that our entrepreneurs are protected, and this existence of this debt cannot straight away create the subject for become subject of the corporate tax. And so this is a transitional period to understand what happens to those sanctioned companies, persons and cooperation partners who are under these international sanctions. I would also like to say that we have to look in parallel the issue how companies attract finances if their cooperation partners are not able to do settlement. And in this case, I would like to say that one crisis we haven't yet finished, and now we have started a new one, and all of us we been thinking how to make it easier for the companies to attract finances, and we have also reduce regulations about borrowed money for which the interest is paid. So right now there is a regulation that if borrowed capital and own capital is 4:1 or exceeds it, then the company has to pay corporate tax for the interest. But this was due to COVID, and in the law related to COVID consequences, due to COVID, we extended it, and in the corporate tax Article 10, Part 1 is not applied in 2021, but this can be used also in 2022 when entrepreneurs incur those short-term difficulties, I hope short-term difficulties in relation to the money freezed by corporate partners freezed money. So I would like to invite entrepreneurs to create those savings unless the accountancy policy for the company is not different, and the law is quite flexible, and also the new amendments will be even more flexible. And if we speak about borrowed means, there are not exceeded interest payments, and this was binding for consequences of COVID-19, and also here in this sanction situation. I would also like to emphasize that entrepreneurs have to look at the situation, how to continue their activities, because there are some regulations about annual reports related to the consequences of COVID-19, we can see that this deadline has been expanded in relation to 2021. And many companies, in relation to those sanctions, which are directly related to the situation and events in Ukraine, there are problems also with Ukraine and settlements with entrepreneurs from Ukraine and deliveries of various goods. In this area, we have nothing new, and we are not prepared to speak about some new regulations, but I would like to remind what the previous speakers said, that our Prime Minister, Mr. Kariņš, said that they've been thinking what kind of support can be provided. Which groups and sectors that will be, we can't speak, but this is a topical issue, and we can see that entrepreneurs can live for 3 years with savings if they don't make any other decision. I also would like to say that according to the data of the Ministry of Finance, about half of the companies have not used their opportunity to take out dividends, which are saved by end of 2017. So therefore, we consider that partially companies have savings of the financial instruments, and so that they can operate with them in the case of severe crisis. And also about the policy of donations in relation to Ukraine, nothing is changed due to sanctions. So the donations policy is, if the company wants to use some tax stimulus in relation to donations to the civilians in Ukraine or to stabilize the crisis, they can use the previous system. So there are 3 models. If the company wants to reduce the amount which is subject to tax, because they do donations, there are 2 opportunities. They can give donations either from the salary foundation or from the previous year's profit. And the most favorable model, which is applied by half of the donations, then the company can reduce the corporate tax. But in this case, the dividends have to be divided. And this regulation for this year is that this donations amount ensure that the tax can be reduced by 85%, but not exceeding 30% of tax, which is paid into the budget for dividends. And this is in relation to this year. And also, I would like to ask the entrepreneurs to be cautious, because the crisis in relation to financial flow and cooperation partners could be bigger than we would expect in the beginning, and to be very cautious when you are giving out your finances with any remuneration. And also, I wanted to say that these donations the entrepreneur cannot on their behalf to bring to Ukraine. If they want to receive some tax exemptions, they have to make these donations to the Latvian public benefit company or to another European public organization, or also this money can be, donations can be given to the state or municipality, which coordinates the flow of money to Ukraine. And so this was about the support measures, and this was main what I wanted to say. I wish to entrepreneurs to have good balances and to have reserves and savings to be able to live at this time when we have sanctions against Russia and Belarus. And I hope our companies will be stronger next year than this year. Thank you. Thank you very much for all this information. From entrepreneurs, we have received one short additional question about taxes. So if there is also this force majeure applied and imposed, talking about taxes. So yeah, here you are, if you're talking about Ukraine, so or about sanctions, I cannot answer straight away. Maybe my colleagues from other sectors can speak about it. We cannot answer straight away. Please send in this question, and we will answer to it in written form, and you can put it also in your cooperation platform. Thank you very much, and good success in your work. Thank you very much. So we have listened to several presentations from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also Financial and Capital Market, and also bank representatives and FIU and Ministry of Finance. And we were trying to find answers to the question how these sanctions are imposed, what to take into account, what are the risks of circumvention, and what are the possibilities to receive information. And we'll continue with several presentations from the State Revenue Service, also colleagues from the banks, and also representatives from the auditing companies and companies Lursoft. And in the end, we will also listen to the information from the State Secretary of the Ministry of Justice about freezing the property rights. Also, I would like to remind that in Slido you can ask questions. We are also following your questions on Facebook, but in Slido it's easier to put all these questions together and also to look for answers later in a written form. And also I wanted to emphasize that all the presentations and also recording of the seminar will be available on the web pages of the organizers. This seminar is organized by the Chamber of Commerce, the Confederation of Employers, the Council of Foreign Investors, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, the Financial and Capital Market Commission, auditor company KPMG, representatives from Lursoft, also representatives from FIU, and Financial Capital Market Commission are sharing their experience and opinions and information they receive about imposing sanctions on a daily basis. As continuation, next presenters, we have representatives from the Customs Board, the Risk Management Department, and Risk Control Department. And they will answer to specific questions related to the customs and sanctions related to the customs. And those questions were sent in already before from the representatives of the entrepreneurs, and therefore the presentation will be quite short. And thank you very much to the representatives from the customs for preparing their presentation in such a short time. And please, viewers, when you ask questions, please try to fit within the topic which is covered in the presentation so that the speakers can answer within their competency. But in case if the questions are not related to the specific area of their expertise, we will try to contact the responsible institutions and find answers to your questions. We already touched upon questions about list of sanctions, and I see that there is a large interest where it is possible in one place to see what are all sanctions from various angles. And unfortunately, the answer is not so great as everyone would have expected, because we need to search for those lists of sanctions in several web pages. And later, the representative of Lursoft will speak about opportunities provided by the private sector. And FIU representative already told what is FIU doing and what kind of sanctions can be found on their web page. But in any case, if we speak about the main steps that have to be taken in order to impose those sanctions successfully, it is very important to start with an assessment how largely you are exposed to risk in relation to the sanctioned countries, and then you can make a to-do list seeing what kind of resources and what is needed to do to ensure imposing of those sanctions. And now we are welcoming Atis Pilāts, who is head of the Customs Department of the State Revenue Service, and also Ilona Stipina, who is the head of the control department of the Customs Board of the State Revenue Service. And I will, in short, speak about sectoral sanctions, which are related to the customs area and also control for the import and export and transit.
Responding to the question where the information can be found, if people have experience with customs procedures, then integrated tariff management system, ITVS, it is the homepage where you can find information, where we receive information from where centralized they make decisions, and regarding the customs, they are included in the ITVS system. They're published there. And concerning the products, certain products, you can look in this system. You can enter the country, the product, where you are bringing them, from where they come, and you can look at the regulations which and what is included there, and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and elsewhere, what we have heard today. I will not comment more on that. I would like to also say that customs works not only with products. We are performing some control measures and activities regarding the companies we know they are sanctioned, and also the mail and luggage is concerned. So the main resource of information is this official journal where there are publications and this ITVS homepage. Additionally, I want to say that the information on sanctions changes very rapidly. We have companies sending us asking questions, what to do. We have a certain product and sending to the certain country. I want to say that, for example, the products are being taken from Riga, and when they come to the border, while they're being transported, then the sanctions are imposed and they cannot be exported. But it was not; they were not aware of that as at the moment of when they commenced the delivery. And also, as I said, the ITVS system there, you can see the information like export restrictions and import restrictions, and also the new regulation, which is in force as at 2 days ago regarding metals and steel. So there's a prohibition to import it, whereas there's also a transition period. And regarding this period, there is no one universal answer to all the cases. You have to look at them and review them independently. Individually, each of these agreements, when it was concluded, whether the commitments were fulfilled, and also the product groups. For some of them, there's no transition period when the beginning is as at the publication, as at the imposition of the sanctions. So sometimes there is no transition period. Talking about Russia, this is what we know already. This is oil products, mechanisms, electronics. And what is relatively new is the export of luxury goods, cars, electronic devices with various border values. And concerning Belarus, the situation is similar with electronics, mechanisms, military products, dual-use products, and import of timber, rubber, cement, and other products. And the same is related to the agreements, that there is no one general formula. You have to review each of the agreements individually. This is all I have. I will give floor to colleague Ilona, but actually no, there was a question from entrepreneurs whether such and such products we can import from Russia and Belarus. We can, if there are no other restrictions or sanctions, or the import and export procedures remain. We are not closing customs, but of course we need to monitor the risks, what the entrepreneurs have, what is the current law. And now I give floor to Ilona. Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Today I'm answering two questions. It is the excise and the first thing is customs bonds, customs guarantees, when the procedures cannot be finalized, and what is the reason why the customs debt occurs, or we will be allowed to finalize the customs procedures. This is basically the question from the companies, from the business we have received about the customs procedure. If you have already commenced the procedure, you have started the procedure, then it is in force by the finalizing of the customs procedure. The customs bond is valid. The guarantor remains also with his commitment, and they, according to the Regulation 86 of the Cabinet of Ministers, then within days it is informed, the State Revenue Service is informed about the guarantor status, that it is ended, and when we have received the decision on revocation, and as the State Revenue Service receives the information, that they prepare the decision on the withdrawal of annulment of the status of the guarantor, if they have informed about their activities. What happens with customs debt? If in case of annulment we have customs debt, then initially the debt is definitely prepared and sent to the company, and the current guarantor is informed about such decision, about debt amount. And in case State Revenue Service is not able to take this debt from the entrepreneur, then they address the guarantor. Usually for the entrepreneur to use to cover this debt, some other entrepreneurs guarantee or their commitment and liability, then in case of sanctions it is not possible, because the sanction idea then is not realized, the aim of the sanction, and if the debt, customs debt is calculated, it has to be paid. And very similar situation is also with excise duty. It is also imposed, this guarantee of excise duty for covering of the excise, and if the products are not then do not enter the market, then, but if the products are being moved, then it is a deferred excise duty, until the products are being taken outside of the European Union, until the export procedure is finalized. You should not start this procedure if you are unsure that the procedure will not be able to be finalized. EAD, electronic administrative document, we do not recommend to start formalizing it, because in months you will have to be paying the excise duty. But if you're planning the export and the export of the products is rejected, then the products are being taken back to the warehouse and the guarantee is again not released from, so it means that the guarantee will be released, but we will have to apply one of the sureties. But if we will not be able to apply it, then the excise duty debt occurs. Regarding the using of this, if the excise duty is not paid, then the guarantor does not submit the documents to the SRS, then the debt occurs and it is asked to be repaid to the guarantor as according to the law. And one other improvised answer to the question related to whether humanitarian products and donations to Ukraine, whether we have to also formalize, then we have all agreed currently in the European Union that it is released from administrative load and document load, and then we are reviewing that accordingly. There is permission to declare on the outer border of the European Union as in the delegated regulation. But to formalize the declaration for humanitarian help cargo, then it is not restricted, but then again we need to also contact the organizations that organize the support in order to deliver the goods, and Poland and Ukraine customs institutions to relieve them from additional tasks. But if the declaration is formalized in written form in the system and there are some difficulties with finalizing the export procedure, then customs is going to assist in order to confirm all the proofs and CRMs, help with formalization of them. But again, humanitarian cargo, well, I recommend to organize it in a centralized manner and deliver what is really crucially necessary, vitally necessary. So this is all from my part. And I wish you good luck in your work and thank you for such ability to quickly provide answers to these questions. Let us continue with one of the most popular questions in Slido, which we have received about sanctions against Russia, Belarus, and new risks of circumvention of those risks. And this is Citadel Bank representative, International Sanction Department representative Saiva Krastiņa. Thank you, Laima, for introduction. And I will tell you about risks of sanctions, avoidance of the sanction from the viewpoint of Citadel Bank. I will also inform you about the context, how the circumvention of sanctions occur, how it's being done. And as the colleagues previously informed, Kristaps Markovskis, the sanctions are binding to the credit and financial institutions and also to entrepreneurs in the EU established here, registered here, and also established outside in the third countries. So European Union sanctions are binding also to subsidiary companies, Latvian subsidiary companies in Russia and Belarus. Whereas if they are violated, then the criminal liability is provided for. There are various sanctions targeted financial against particular persons, legal, both natural, then they are criminally liable. And also the sector sanctions, sectoral sanctions, which are directed against Russia and Belarus. They are very broad. Against broad product categories and service categories. We have seen also since yesterday regarding caviar and golf balls and sports equipment, car parts, vehicle car parts, luxury car parts. So the restrictions are rather broad and we are facing them and the entrepreneurs are facing them. What happens when the sanctions enter into force if, for example, the credit institution sees that a particular transaction could be related to or is related to violation of sanctions, where there are targeted sanctions against particular persons, physical and legal entities. It is incoming transaction. Then the duty of the bank is about the incoming payments from sanctioned persons, physical or legal entities. They have to freeze these assets. And outgoing payments, if they see to the sanctioned subject or this company under control of the sanctioned persons, then the banks refuse to proceed with transactions. If we're talking about products and services, then such transactions, again, they are refused to be processed. I would also like to highlight and reflecting on what the FIU representative mentioned, that the persons against whom the sanctions are imposed, they will, for example, say they will do everything that their cooperation partners notice also that they would comply with any other requirements for the sanctions not to be imposed, but we need to take into consideration that it's not just about the physical and legal entities you can find in the list, in the, for example, list of FIU or in official European Union or the United States of America documents, but also against the companies under the ownership of directly or indirectly under the ownership of those sanctioned persons. But not only the property, but also the supervision is imposed, and it is a parameter whether these sanctions are applicable. And if the company then is under the control of the sanctioned person, then again the sanctions are applicable, are binding. So the sanctions against Russia, against Dmitry Kiselyov, he is the director of Россия сегодня, and he owns zero currently shares of Россия сегодня, but he controls this media, and even though he doesn't have any ownership rights, but he controls this media, then also all the sanctions are imposed on this media. We have guidelines, and you can find them if you click on the link below. We would also like to warn the entrepreneurs to be careful, because the sanctioned persons are trying to hide their transactions and ownership rights. And we have already seen in presentation of FCMC and FIU, they're using those prolonged chains of transactions, and they're not reporting certain transactions. So maybe the company sometimes is unaware that they're being involved in some sanction avoidance chains, and such transactions could be refused to be processed, or they will not be. We have to warn them that maybe they will not receive remuneration for these products, and because there are sanctions against certain persons, and in case of sector, it is against the products or services. And of course, they are also criminally liable, well, in the worst case scenario. So law enforcement institution can establish that this company is involved in the schemes of circumvention of the sanctions, and if it is organized from Latvia, sometimes it is performed by the Latvian companies organizing the product delivery through Kazakhstan and through other countries, to Russia, to Belarus. If it is performed by the company in Latvia, then the criminal liability is provided for.
Now I will in more detail explain about risks, which are the most typical, the most often seen at the bank side, how these persons from Latvian side or the Baltic level are involved in these schemes of circumventing sanctions. One of the most classical cases is that, for example, the business with Russian deliveries, or also the company ordering something now is destroyed, but the company in Latvia receives an offer from a new company in Kazakhstan or some other country, and this company is offering to continue the business which used to be with Russia or Belarus. And it looks like that it's a totally new partner from Kazakhstan, and the risk is that the Russian and also Belarusian companies are following the lists of sanctions and what can be delivered and cannot be delivered. And so they are establishing new companies in other countries and using these intermediary companies to circumvent sanctions. I will speak about it also later in more detail, but it's very important to make sure who is the real manufacturer, not the dealer or the intermediary, and also who is the end recipient of these goods if we speak about exports from the European Union. One more very typical case is if if, for example, you are an agricultural company and suddenly you receive a very, very profitable cooperation proposal in the IT sector. For example, we need to deliver the load of goods, and the existing partner has bankruptcy, and we need to use your company, and please could you help us? And the possible profit is 300 or 500%, and this is a very profitable deal where they offer you to get involved. And this is especially risky if the Russian or Belarusian state structures are involved, where there are dual use goods or also commercially available goods that could help Russian or Belarusian military forces and strengthening their military abilities. And this is, of course, additional annex in the regulation. But please draw attention that those once at all offers, and if there is any link with country's sanction, be very, very careful. Another very typical situation and case we have noticed is that the cooperation partner is fictitious. If we look at the company register of Russia or Google Maps, you can see that addresses is either fictitious for this company, or this company is not registered in the specific address and doesn't exist, or something else. And this information which is provided for the Latvian company about their partners in the third country, especially in Russia and Belarus, is not true. And there are justified suspicions that it is not true. Also, one of the characteristic situations, if we talk about sectoral sanctions, is that there are goods or services, and in case of goods, for example, the documentation is not precise, or is very general. For example, it is said that IT technologies or something else, something is deleted or copied over, and it is hard to understand who is the manufacturer or deliverer of these goods and which is the intermediary. And the manufacturer, it looks in reality the manufacturer is the factory in Belarus that is in the sanction list, and this information in these documents is somehow hidden or deleted or erased, and there is an offer to do the business saying that all the documents are not available, but everything is good. So if there is something related to the sectoral limitations, restrictions, even if Russia and Belarus is not involved, just make sure that something is not hidden. Also about customs codes, it is very characteristic that on the surface category in these customs codes, the wrong number is given, and under this number in 3 levels down, these goods are in the sanction list, but this general code of customs is related to something else. So please check all these documents if they are not falsified or forged, and that you can make sure about and be sure about authenticity of these documents. The next example I would also like to draw your attention to is that if in some documents or contracts it seems that the partner is the EU company or the US company or company of the country which is not under sanctions, but in these documents, accounts where you need to transfer the money or registration addresses or postal addresses are Russian or Belarusian. If the partner is Russia or Belarus, it is clear that this partner, of course, will have their accounts and address in Russia and Belarus. But if this partner is registered, for example, in the EU, including also Latvia, but they are requesting to transfer money to another country, especially Russia or Belarus, to the account of the same company in Russia and Belarus, then over there, there could be also risks of circumventing the sanctions. And that could speak about the situation that this company is operating within the interests of the third company or third person, and it means this company is organizing this deal with, for example, Latvian companies organizing the deal, but they are doing this in the interest of the Russian company who are sanctioned. So please draw attention to those higher risks and risk indicators. Also, the same what FIU representative said for several times, please draw your attention to those structures of owners who are your cooperation partners. So who is their real beneficial owner? And if you see offshores, request from your cooperation partners information so that they can provide confirmations or documents what is situated and positioned behind those offshores, because also sanction subjects can be hiding in these offshore companies where the owners are not known. So in reality, the owners are sanctioned, and cooperation with Latvian LTD belonging to offshore company, which belongs to the subject of the sanctions, that would be also a violation of sanctions. So if you discover such a complicated structure or offshore companies, especially for Latvian companies, cooperation partners, please be very, very careful, because there are possible that there are sanction risks. According to the sanction law, all the persons in Latvia, individuals in Latvia, are asked to be in line and in these requirements, and we also can request it from our partners. We have to say that I have to work according to the sanctions in Latvia and the EU, so I need all the information to make sure that the sanctions cannot be applied and imposed for this deal. Another characteristic is that unusually large number of intermediaries are used. Usually you are having business with a manufacturer, but suddenly in this business deal, the one intermediary appears, or even several intermediaries. Usually we have one dealer or distributor, and for example, but now you discovered that this partner is not anymore, this distributor or intermediary is not operating anymore, and there are some others who have come up. And if you see this information about all this delivery chain, you can see that there are also sanction risks, and my colleague will speak about it later. Also, if we talk about sectoral sanctions, the goods are situated close to the border with Russia and Belarus, close to the transport hubs or ports which are close to Russia, for example. Then there are risks that those goods are delivered to this village close to the border, and at night they are delivered over the border, and sanction risks can be seen here as well. And I'm not only speaking about border between Russia and Latvia, but also Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. So please draw attention to which place physically your goods are delivered, and if those goods are the ones which are in list of sectoral goods, then there could also be some violations. All these examples I told you about, and also other advice you can find in Citadel Bank webpage, homepage, and considering the regimes which are developing every day, almost every second day, there are some new sanctions. We are trying to inform our clients, and we are publishing on the webpage a lot of advice and information, and other credit institutions are doing the same. And if we continue, how the company is facing the situation that the bank that has discovered violations of sanctions, it is absolutely clear that Latvian banks in no case will execute this transaction, or also in specific cases there could be freezing of assets if the sanctions are applied. For example, it is discovered that a partner of Latvian company, they are sanctioned directly or indirectly through the control or property rights. In those cases, the transaction is not executed, and right now banks are requesting a lot of information from their clients about their transactions. For example, if in the payment it is stated that it is for goods or for electronics, then considering that mobile phone costs more than than 750 euros. If it costs more than 750 euros, then sanctions are imposed for them if it's delivery to Russia. So banks have a duty to request more documents from clients to discover whether sanctions can be applied for those deals or not. So therefore, we are asking clients and companies in their payments to put as much details as possible, so that it's clear to understand and also to reduce the risks both for the company and also for the bank. And the third case is that the financial service is not provided if there is no information about the specific deal, or if there are a very, very high risk that this transaction is under sanctions, and there should be a detailed analysis, chemical analysis in the laboratory to discover whether it's sanctioned or not, and then considering the policy of supervisor of the bank, regulator of the bank, and that their requirements might differ from banks, this deal will not be executed. And banks, of course, they are partners together with entrepreneurs, and all together we are trying to be in line with those sanctions. But at the same time, we have to remember that entrepreneurs also have to be responsible for their goods and also the parts of their goods, that everything is in line with sanctions. And this is binding for everyone, for banks, for entrepreneurs, the state institutions, NGOs, reacting to the war from Russia against Ukraine. And if we effectively impose sanctions and do everything possible to have effective sanctions, then it's possible that the war would end faster and we would be able to return back to the normal business as usual. And the fact that bank notices this sanction payment and bank does their side and their job, it doesn't reduce the responsibility of the individual to also make sure that something is not under sanctions. And in case, if you are doubting whether the specific transaction is possible or not possible, and very often this possibility is also impacted by corresponding banks and the intermediary banks. So please contact your bank whether this specific deal will be possible or won't be possible. And then this issue will be solved, not getting to the situation that bank has rejected the payment, or also the accounts are frozen, and it is done when goods are already, for example, delivered. So that's all from me, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Simon, I will ask you one clarifying question, quite a challenging question about the new sanctions. I believe that it is possible to approach and answer this about luxury goods. So 300 euros per kilo or for a jar. So if something costs 299 euros, can we send it, deliver it or not? What do we do? Thank you for the question. All of us, we have questions about these new sanctions which came into force yesterday. As an example, there is this 300 or 750 euros threshold, and it refers to the golf balls. So the question is, how many do we need for this restriction to be imposed? So this is a risk appetite question, actually. And how large is the possibility when you execute this deal that you violate sanctions? So possibly while the sanctions are just recently added and there are no detailed explanations from the European Commission or competent institutions, what can be understood with this? Possibly that in this initial period, there should be more cautious approach until this understanding increases between financial institutions and also entrepreneurs, how to impose the sanctions which came into force yesterday. But the basic principle is, if there are justified suspicions that sanctions can be binding for this transaction will not be done. So I return to my advice. If you have doubts or concerns that it could be this type of deal, so please, before you do this transaction, contact your bank and discover what is the situation. Thank you very much, Saiva. Have a success in all these challenges, and also thank you very much to the credit institutions for this active cooperation, looking for answers themselves and also looking for the best solutions for the clients, being in line with sanctions. And we will continue with a very, very topical and current question about supply chains. And we have the representative Edvards Grāsis from KPMG Baltics, Director and Risk Consultation. So please, the floor is yours. Yes, hello to everyone. I am happy to participate and to add to the information given by a lot of experts. And I will speak about the analysis of the supply chains and where to look for information in relation to this. So just a reminder that there are a lot of sectors which are involved in the EU and the US, so finance, transport, trade, and import-export, natural persons and legal persons. So the question could be how to focus, how to think about it. So in general, if we look, there are several blocks. How these sanctions are planned in a long term and how the control and risk assessment will be organized. So we will look at what is business specifics, where do you work, what kind of goods or services you are selling or buying, and do you have a system, how do you analyze, how do you do due diligence to clients, and mainly today we are speaking about the supply chains of cooperation partners. So you have to check who are the cooperation partners, direct and indirect, how much they are related to Russia and Belarus, what are the structure, what is the information available publicly and also in other sources, what are the routes, how these goods are delivered, the sea or and what are the intermediaries, and how these goods get to you, and how your goods are sent away.
And what we have to consider when we assess our cooperation partner, we look at the registration and the country of operation. So whether they are registered or performing their activity in Russia and Belarus. So this is again, this is the spectrum of the sanctions, and then we concentrate on these. And also compliance with the sanctions. We have to look at whether the partner is sanctioned themselves. The colleagues previously also said about lists. And I will also go into detail where I recommend to review the information and whether they are in the owner structure and whether there are some sanctioned persons or companies there. And the third thing is we're thinking about the products and services. What kind of products and services are provided by the partner, whether they are sanctioned or not, whether we have to analyze more in detail. And then the fourth stage, maybe the most difficult one, is how to look at the partner is like partners of the partner. So where the supply chain goes further and look at as long as we can into the chain maybe this source, the initial source of all the product or service is sanctioned. So again, it is important not to look at the direct partnerships, but also going deeper, who stands behind them, and so-called supply chain, everyone involved, who performs the payments, are there any intermediaries who deliver the goods, maybe they are sanctioned in current situation. We have to raise awareness to these topics and be careful and diligent. So it's the principle, know your supplier. You have to gain information on the supplier. This is what, it's nothing new. This is what banks also require from you, from your cooperation partners. You are asking your cooperation partners, this is like, what is the bare minimum? And what we recommend is the legal entity name, registration country, ownership structure, who are the direct owners, legal entities, natural persons, then all the structure, beneficiaries, officials, stakeholders. As in the presentation of the Orange representative, this is how the banks also look at it, this so-called due diligence, and they will not process the payment even though sanctions are, for example, not legally imposed. And then the products and services in general, and what does your partner do, whether these fields are not under sanctions, maybe they are not allowed to conduct their services. And we have to understand, maybe they're on the way in the supply chain, there are some risks that can raise some problems. Is it a risk for the business, or everything happens according to the law? And which are the main partners and suppliers? And what it helps to understand to the entrepreneur is, once again, so this is the name of the company, as you can compare it against the sanction list. You can have a look whether or not that is that particular company, because in various jurisdictions, in various countries where it is registered, also ownership structures and owners and beneficiary review against the sanction list. The third one, compliance with the products and services and their names against the sanction list, and the geographic sanction risk evaluation, which helps us to understand whether there is any risk that a chain in the whole supply chain is exposed to some risk. Maybe we need to find more information, ask for more information to research, and also information on the main suppliers and cooperation partners of your partners, and again also checking it against the sanction list. And also the practical information on the resources, reference for information, source of information. The first is, you have to think about, and there's a good practice, is know your supplier survey. This is for receiving information from the cooperation partner. If they are not sanctioned and they are interested in continuing the cooperation, then they will be responsive to your questions. It is the possibility for them to answer your questions. We're talking about also the banks, because they have done it and they also need it. So as they said, ownership structures, locations of their operations, and any information for this due diligence, what the partner does, who stands behind them, etc. And this is like the basis which you can independently check in the public databases if you can. It is commercial register lists and other state public databases. I will also mention in practical examples further. Other credible public sources of information, it's media. Other, also if it's paid databases, which work with some entrepreneurship registers. Well, sometimes it just is enough if you go to Google or Yandex search and search for some information. And then in complicated cases, when you really want to continue cooperation, but you need to understand and need to be verified by some third-party assessors, what is going on behind, and for them to prepare some information, that you have to address also such services. But what you need to do on your own, as we were talking about the establishment of these beneficiaries and who is behind your cooperation partner. This is the 50% principle, that if in some they have this impact or control of 50% or more of the company, then it means that the company itself is sanctioned. And it is important that we shouldn't really risk cooperating with them. We have to look at and understand the whole ownership rights structure. And again, filling in the survey, public databases, everything we can find out who stands behind them and who comprises this ownership right structure. This is one of the examples I will show, because at the first level, they do not own 50%, less than 50%, but at the well, if you go below, for example, person B, company A belongs 100% to person B, then in this first level, they do not have the 50%, and seemingly there's no risk, or the person is not, you're not cooperating with a sanctioned person. But again, actually, through such scheme, they indirectly own these companies that are sanctioned. And again, resources and information for review of the suppliers. If you want to independently search for information on your cooperation partners, I will now focus my attention to Russia Federation. This is tax service database. It's called EGRIP, and there you can input the ID number. It is a free resource, and you can find information on the title of the company, owners of the company. This is like the first step. Then you can use also Spark database. It is a paid database, but you can have a demo version for some time, and then if you pay for it, you will get detailed information and detailed access. And also regarding the Belarus companies, also paid database information, Kartoteka. So there are, as I said, also paid resources. So of course, not always it is like in Latvia, for example, where these resources are for free, but nevertheless, I recommend using them. And if you look further, then how to review the sanctions, then one is already FIU mentioned, FID.gov LV, where there's UN, EU lists, you can search there. Also, additional recommendation is to look at the EU Sanctions Map. It is a EU resource. You can look geographically, what are the regions which are exposed to the sanctions, what are in force, particular products, particular services, and also educate yourself on the topic, find the geographies, compare it to the ones you work with. And of course, you can also gain full list of, like it's a full EU list. It is, again, it is the reference of the FIU, but again, you can have a look at, but in practice, you have to look at OFAC sanction search, sanctions list search, and this allows you to search through the US sanctions list and the persons there. And compared to this local search and minimum name score, for example, this means that they will find some related or not that precisely. If you search, well, basically that if there's a question on how to write that person's name maybe correctly, because you're writing it in Latin, and you can be more free in how you search them, and it is a possibility that you will find them better. You will find their information, who is sanctioned, for what they're sanctioned. So I would say that this is a bare minimum of what you have to look through. And regarding the regularity of those inspections, then I would say you have to perform them rather often, because it's being updated every other day, and sanction packages, after each new sanction package you need to review this information. So for yourself, maybe internally, you also store such data, or you have such information on the due diligence and their board of directors, and you have to keep track of any changes on your particular cooperation partners you have already. And if we look at the strategic significance product review, then it is Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is and TARIC database with EU, that EU has introduced it for import and export dual-use products, and the database integrated in the State Revenue Service. This was also shown to you previously. I will now show you how TARIC database looks like. There you can write the goods code, destination or origin, and or review the full list if you wish. And there, this TN701, for example, what does it mean? TN702, this is again the restrictions. When you click on them, then you see what kind of restriction and sanction is imposed on the particular group of products. This is current publication. Previously, this is the new parts, how it's been amended and what is included further to this particular sanction, as said on this. And all this can be done also through the database of State Revenue Service. There you write again the goods code, or you look at the structure, map structure. It's the same, and it is in Latvian. So this may be easier for you now to understand. Somewhere in the middle there, though, it says two, and this two is those new things like included, added. And the good thing is that this is in Latvian. At the end, I would also like to mention that it is important to think about the delivery route which is being used. We have to make sure about any services of intermediaries, any intermediaries on the way when the goods are being delivered to you, or how you deliver the goods, what could be the risks on road, and because the products maybe are not directly sanctioned, but the risk exposure occurs due to geographic route. So if maybe there are some cargo controls has to be introduced, for example, UK blocks all Russian-linked ships in its ports, and there are more plans and thoughts how to restrict the ability of these ships to enter the port. So even if your goods are not sanctioned, considering the location of the ship, then again, it can restrict their business operations. So you have to look at through where the goods are going to be taken and by whom, and be aware of any sanctions that are already in force or to be imposed. From my part, that's it. This is summary on how I look at it, where we're going, in what direction. If any questions you have, please do not hesitate. Thank you, Edvards, for your presentation. One tricky question we have from a viewer regarding the Russian resource use, as we understand that the payment possibilities, considering the SWIFT limitations and other Russian pages are not available for us right now. What to do? What are other possibilities on the research, because the internet resources are restricted to us. For example, if we cannot find information, what else we can do? Well, so far I have not heard that practically it is a difficulty. Currently, obtaining information is still possible. It's from the practical side, and of course there are other resources as well. It is publicly available information. There are various databases, paid databases, where there are all sanction lists, summaries, various service providers. Maybe they're paid, maybe you have to go somewhere. But if you cannot directly, for example, access the available databases in practice, I've not had maybe anything, there's no other possibility but really use what is available to you, what you have access to. Even if you don't have access to some particular resources, then use the ones you do have access to. Thank you, Edward, and good luck in your work, and also related to sanctions. And we are continuing on the aspect of obtaining information, one of the most crucial in the field of sanctions, and now Lursoft corporate client consultant Ruta Beiruta on sanction review solutions. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will be closing this seminar with practical things, where we find information, on our cooperation partners. My name is Ruta Beiruta, and I am working in the Lursoft with the large and medium companies in Latvia. And Lursoft is that company which is searching for solutions in order for us to be able to access the information. Sanction topic is not new. In 1997, we already started working in this field. Then we had money laundering law and other amendments taking shape. But again, how it was perceived. They said, okay, maybe the accountants need this for their work. But then 2009, we had a person, or later we had a person, somebody from Kurzeme that was also included in sanction list, and only then we understood that this is something that we can all face, and this is very close to us. Now it is 2022, and no question already anymore remains on the significance of this topic. So let us move on into this topic. Sanctions against Russia and Belarus, practical numbers, impact of Russia and Belarus companies on our economy, then capital investment from Belarus. We have a rapid growth, then again fall, but anyways, it's been 19 million is the amount which is invested from this country. Whereas if we look at Russia, then even though there's a stability over the last years, but this is 429 million of investment. As you understand, these numbers are not low, they're not little. Then, and if we look at the impact of Belarus and Russia on our economy, then in taxes, both these countries pay approximately 170 million. But if we're looking at the employment rates, then the companies related to the capital, to these companies, this is almost 18,000 employees. And why not? Like Russia is number 7,
Ja skatāmies uz
on the number
nozarēm,
7 of
tad arī šeit
investment.
redzam, ka ieguldītāji,
Look at the
lielākie
sectors,
uzņēmumi,
we can
lielākais
see
uzņēmumu
that
skaits ir
the largest number of the companies are related to the transportation of loads and the real estate. If we speak about Belarus and also the wholesales and the sales of timber in case of Belarus. If we talk about Russia, the most number is investment of real estate and also IT, loads transporting and also construction and of living houses. So those are the companies that we theoretically need to look at and also control. And quite a large number. If we look at the actual numbers, capital investment, we can see almost 700 Belarusian and Russian for about 4,000 companies. And if we talk about participants, natural persons, more than 4,000 from Russia. And usually we look at the Latvian companies, but actually the largest risk are our cooperation partners. And that we have to remember, especially when we sell our products and also purchase raw materials, not only in those two countries. We have to analyze very attentively all international transactions and also to discover who is a real beneficial owner. This is not just a wish, but this is a real necessity. If we look at the resources to check and control the sanctions, in order to do the high quality control, we have to understand who is our client, all the persons involved in his chain of supply. And if now we do transactions with foreign countries, we have to discover who is intermediary, who is end recipient and partners of our clients. And we often face challenges like my colleagues already spoke before, that there is no united databases, not a lot of databases where we can enter and find information about any country in the world. We also don't have information about local registers of the countries. And if we find it, the local company register of those countries are in their official language, state language, and it is very hard for us to find something. And even more problem, which we feel now, especially with small, medium companies, is feeling that data is very expensive in other places. In Latvia, data, of course, is relatively cheap. And if we understand the costs of high-quality databases of other countries, this is another reason which deter us and which stop us look for and control this. And instead of that, we are looking for other databases which are free of charge, but the information might be obsolete, not updated, not having really updated data on those. And all this together lead us to a very formal attitude and formal analysis of transactions. And we have to understand that we cannot continue like that. And so the first question and first thing I wanted to emphasize is ask your client for information, and not only information about their company and persons and partners involved in their company, but you can also ask your client, how can I verify this information in your country? Where is the register or databases in your country where I can make sure about data submitted? And also don't remember, usually, as usual, when you receive this information, review it and check once more whether what the cooperation partner has submitted to you is really valid and updated. And this is a very, very huge necessity now to avoid circulation of false information. And of course, you have to understand that it's sometimes not enough with just one case, one checking, but you might need to request information also during your business deal. And be prepared that the same questions can be asked also to you, and the same documents you possibly also will have to submit. So once more, where can you search data about client? In Latvia, for Latvian companies, the data are not problems. So data about Latvian companies can be found on open data portals, the company register, and also official company register data users databases, for example, and in case if you ask clients and the information you receive from them is not sufficient, you can also look at the e-justice portal and find the information. Also look at the open data in a specific country, and in serious cases you can use LexNext. Also the previous colleague in the presentation spoke about other databases that can be used in relation to Russia and Belarus. So in any case, use all these opportunities to really check your partner, not to approach all these processes just formally. And all the day we are speaking about the fact that it's important not only to look at the company and persons involved, but also look at the business partners. And here, as much as it is binding for Latvia, I would like to say that there are no problems. In our market, there are several solutions. Also, Lursoft offers those spider maps, so that when you discover and find a specific person very easy, with one push of the button, you can also see the relation to other companies. So these linkage graphs are very, very usable and valuable instrument to see how Latvian companies are involved between themselves. But if we want to understand who are the business partners of our partners, again, with Latvia, it's quite easy. We have created several instruments. For example, personal dossier is one of those. All these linkages are put in one table, and you can read it and make conclusions. And when you have discovered who are the involved persons, then you can check types of sanctions. And let us remember that there are two types of sanctions, but what we are checking, there are financial and civil rights limitations. And if we talk about sanctions, we can see that for Latvia there are a bit more than 18,000 subjects of the sanction. Then in Russia, those are about 2,000, and in Belarus it's about 500. And if we talk about search engines, so where can we find and where can we check the companies and the linked persons? One of those solutions is the webpage of FIU. My colleagues already spoke about it. And in their search, you can look in UN, the EU, and the Latvian sanction lists. And at the same place, there are also links where you can make the next step in OFAC and the UK sanction lists. If we talk about financial things that you can do it in OFAC page, showing this once more. My colleague already told about it. And the third free of charge search engine is also Lursoft. So Lursoft sanction search engine is supplemented, so you can look for sanctions in all the four places which are binding, plus United Kingdom, which is also very important for Latvia. And also the transliteration peculiarities are also added. So you can find the sanction subjects even if you write their names in Latvian with Latvian letters, or if you write with Latin letters which are not in line with translation from Cyrillica. So this search is much more sensitive not to make mistakes due to transliteration. And also in this search engine there are additional linkages about some kind of some things which which are the same in several documents. And so there are possibilities not to miss some information due to you maybe some writing mistakenly or something like that. And also AML information lists are also created here for the subjects of AML law. So it's accountants, lawyers, and court bailiffs, and their duty is not only to check sanctions, but also state risks and address risks and so on. So with push of one button, you can generate this information where there are much wider information. And also the sanction lists are checked, checking the company itself and also officials and the sanction chains through which the beneficial ownership is done. If your company has internal control system, if you're checking those sanctions, but you don't need such a wide group of risks as it is in AML risks, then it's possible to do the automated checking of sanctions, and you just write down the name and you receive that document, and it's very easy to save this document. So those automated solutions in very simple version are available. But the problems occur in cases when there are several clients. And if there are several clients, we have also created a solution. So one of those is data checking with files. So you can export registration numbers from Excel in the checking system, do the checkings and download results. This is fast, this is very convenient, and also adjusted for several larger portfolio of clients to be able to check several partners. And in this way, you can both check Latvian companies and foreign companies and persons if you have gathered such data. And for a very large companies, one of the solutions and the main solution is the linkage of the system. So it is possible here to link together the systems so that they among themselves automatically do the sanction checks. And this can be done before writing the new invoice, and also pressing the button refresh, and also after the registering a new client in the system. So such kind of linkage between systems is also possible. But changes of sanction and updates in sanction lists happen not only by days, but also by hours. So it is very important to be able to follow everything that happens. And there is also automated function, which is sanction monitoring. If we have summarized the lists of our clients, we can switch on this monitoring in case if some of our partners or clients get into the list of sanctioned persons, we can receive announcement about it in our email. And there is also a possibility not to receive an email, but to have announcement in our system, and so that specific blocks in relation what is found are also highlighted, and you receive this information. But in case if this automated supervision and monitoring is too difficult, you can also look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs webpage, the bulletin of sanctions, where it's in a very nice way it's summarized what changes are and what updates have happened. I will also speak about sectoral sanctions, because we are able to check people and companies, but sectoral sanctions sanctions, they are binding for the goods and sectors. And it is not so easy to find them in these sanction lists and search engines. And I would recommend to use the map of the EU. You can open a specific country and you can see what are the bans, and also you can look at the UN sanction map and see what kind of sanctions and bans are for a specific country. And so, in summary, what and where to check? So right now, the checking for sanctions in relation to Latvian companies and foreign persons, it's not a problem anymore. For this, free of charge and also without authorization, you can use the FIU search or OFAC search and also LURSOFT. If we speak about automation, that would help us to save time and so on. So for AML subjects, special automated solutions are created for small companies, and for medium and large companies, we can organize sanction check with Excel, and also that can you also do yourself, or also we can assess all your portfolio according to the necessity which is for your specific business. For large company, there is the linkage of the systems where sanction checks are performed automatically. Therefore, please use all the available and offered solutions to be able to protect your business from financial and reputation risks. That's all from my side. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rūta, for description, such a wide and such a really good description and solutions how to solve various problems. And let us continue with additional guest, the State Secretary of the Ministry of Justice, Mihails Popsievich, who will speak about the updated things related to sanctions, which is of high interest for the public and also entrepreneurs. So aspects related to the real estate and freezing of real estate and other issues. Please, the floor is yours.
Kamēr mēs uzgaidām Tieslietu ministrijas valsts sekretāra kungu, kamēr viņš pieslēgsies, vēlos...
While we are waiting for the State Secretary to connect, I would like to remind that it is possible to ask questions using hashtag sanctions, and also the presentation, so materials are available for everyone. So good day, can you see me? Yes. Can you see my presentation? Please do full screen, then we can see it. So can you see it now? Okay, then I will speak without the presentation in this case. So what I will provide information today is related to the real estate and the sanctions imposed on real estate. Also, under the supervision of the Ministry of Justice, there are other registers. We are speaking about the company registers that has 14 various registers, but the information where you can find information about sanctions related to the companies, you heard about it. I was listening a little bit to the previous speaker, and I believe that all this workshop is about this. So I will not comment about this. I will just in the end say a couple of things, what we do in the company register, what we haven't had before. But right now I will tell about the real estate issues, what is done in this area.
So one of the objects against which the sanctions are directed is real estate, real property. And we are talking about any kind of real property, both buildings, land, forest, and water bodies. So the rights on the real estate has to be registered, and there is a land register. And also they have homepage, Seminārs LV, which is Land Register LV, where you can see this is state official information where any real estate is registered, and there are special marks if there are some encumbrances on this. And there is also information on the sanctions. There's a summary on sanctions regarding the property. And if we're talking about the sanctions on real estate and property, then you can see that both for legal entities and physical persons, the information there is only about those people who are sanctioned. And there are certain rules. So those marks and are regarding the particular restrictions are decided by the court, by the regional court, and then the court performs this, puts this in the register, this information. And then this information is given to court administration, which is the administration under the Ministry of Justice. And they take all these lists, sanction lists, which send, and this is all sent to the courts. But this is only related to one part, which we directly see in the sanctions list. And this is why the court administration, additionally, together with the commercial register, they identify not only the persons included in the sanction lists, but also legal entities that are related to these people, whether they are beneficiaries or they are beneficiaries of some supply chain company, or some structure company, and they have impact or control over the real estate related to this real estate, or they gain some benefit from it. Later, when these persons are identified, the court administration sends information to all the courts, and it is the obligation of the court to review these announcements within 10 days and make their decision. So they're making the decision on further restrictions, restrictions to or bans to do anything with this property. And as they review, they perform certain activities, and then they leave these marks that these activities have been initiated. What I need to tell more here is that, and that is important, is we cannot exclude the situation that when the beneficiary or some related person, that they are trying to avoid these bans. And for the court, all those requests, confirmation requests, they review them in a particular order, but the sanctions are a priority. If a person has been in the sanctions list, they are going to primarily take this request from the court administration and impose ban on certain activities for the property. What this ban really means in some more complicated words, this is basically a civil liability encumbrance. It means that they cannot give it to someone, transfer the rights to someone. They cannot sell it. They cannot preserve it, seize it. And this is after this mark, they cannot do any of these activities. So they cannot attach it. And this is related to also transferring, if the person is from the sanctions list dies, then this inheritance transfer cannot be cannot occur here in this situation. This cannot be transferred as an inheritance. The next question is again what this sanction, what this ban means. We have heard in the media, it is you cannot transfer the rights of ownership or using rights of this property. So it means that the owner of the property can remain the user of this property. If the people live there, they will be able to continue using the property. But here are the questions which arise. For example, it is some business property and it is being managed so that there are some premises of the property or other premises of property are used by other physical or legal entities. And the question is, in this case, whether it can continue this operation or not, because the agreement continues to be in force. But if we're talking about the sanctioned persons or persons related to sanctions, if their assets are frozen, we need to take into consideration if you transfer them money and you objectively were not aware of that person has been imposed sanctions on, these assets are going to be frozen and you will not be able to pay them also. So I want to stress that such situation on the transactions can only be allowed if really you do not know or there has not been a possibility to find out what kind of or if any sanctions are imposed on the particular person. Commercial register, court administration are working actively to ensure that the legal entities, related legal entities for those properties, for those properties to have sanctions in the future, and the information is updated as quickly as possible. So this morning at 9 o'clock, the courts have received 41 announcements, and for 6 of them, they have already had those ban marks, which means that the courts have already decided and made the decisions and ordered changes in the land register. This is and some of them were physical entity, natural persons, but the others were legal entities where the beneficiaries are sanctioned. This is about this unified single land register information. And I also wanted to say that already today, I hope that tonight, but tomorrow the latest, the Ministry of Justice is going to publish information on other state registers, which is the resource of a different state institution on vehicles, on transportation units, water transportation units, air transportation units. And also that Ministry of Justice is now working together with the commercial register. We are preparing amendments in a law thereof that these rules also are imposed on the legal bodies where the sanctioned entrepreneurs are actually in the chain, or the ownership right belongs to them or their beneficiaries. This is from my part. Everything I wanted to say. Thank you for comments from the Ministry of Justice. And the questions we have is they are related to the other information that will be yet published. And good luck in your work, and thank you.
Jā, ar šo arī noslēdzam mūsu šīs dienas semināru.
Hereby, we are finalizing, concluding today's seminar. Thank you to the speakers, to the listeners, to the audience. And I would like to remind that the recording of the presentation, we are going to have this presentation, this seminar, recording of it, published in the web pages of the organizers, the Chamber of
semināru materiāliem. Stingri nosodot Krievijas karu Ukrainā
and by condemning
paveicot visu
the
iespējamo, lai
war
sankcijas efektīvi piemērotu, tās sasniegt mērķi,
in Ukraine,
arī šīs dienas
and to reach the objective, we are finalizing this seminar. The sanctions can only be lifted when the military, when the war ends and the international law is obeyed and the rule of law and peace is ensured. Let us all do all that is in our force to ensure this. Thank you all for listening.